Look, I know how this sounds. I wouldn't believe it myself if I weren't the one living it. I'm only sharing this here because, well, if there's anyone out there who has some advice, or if, God forbid, someone else finds themselves in a similar situation, at least they'll know they aren't alone. I live in a house I inherited from my great uncle, a quiet, isolated place nestled deep in the countryside. From the outside, it's just an unassuming cottage with peeling paint and old, rusting gutters. Inside, though, there's an unnerving stillness. My great uncle Victor was a bit of an eccentric, always warning me about leaving things as they were and never disturbing the basement. When I was little, he'd tell me stories about hidden realms and strange shadows lurking in corners, tales that gave me nightmares. But he always seemed perfectly sane, albeit a little too cryptic for comfort. I chalked it up to his loneliness and that he spent too much time in the woods with his own thoughts. He lived here alone for decades before he died, and when the house became mine, I thought I'd spend a few months cleaning it up, getting it ready to sell. One night, while I was organizing the clutter in the basement, I found an old, splintered door in the far corner, partially hidden behind stacks of dusty boxes and old shelves. I had been down in that basement before, but I could swear that door wasn't there. My flashlight barely lit the area, and I remember feeling an odd pull, like an invisible thread was tugging me toward it. The door creaked open with a heavy, almost mournful groan, revealing a narrow hallway beyond. I hesitated, but something in me, maybe morbid curiosity, maybe something else, drove me forward. I didn't notice the door closing behind me until I heard a faint click. I turned and the door was gone. Only bare, stone walls remained. At first, I told myself that this was some kind of optical illusion, a hidden latch or a secret panel that my uncle must have installed. But no matter how I searched, I found no sign of the door. My only choice was to press on and hope to find another way out. The hallway led me to a room that looked unsettlingly familiar. It was almost identical to the main sitting room upstairs, but the wallpaper was faded, and the furniture was covered in sheets that sagged with age. As I peered closer, I noticed strange differences. Empty picture frames hanging crooked on the walls, the same dusty scent of a forgotten place. And yet, the air felt thick, heavy in my lungs. Then I heard it, faint footsteps shuffling somewhere beyond. When I called out, my voice fell flat, swallowed by the silence. The next room was even stranger. A small dining table sat in the middle of the hallway, leaving barely enough room to squeeze past it. Other pieces of furniture, sofas, chairs, a grandfather clock, were piled against the walls, almost as if someone had left in a hurry or was hiding something. The clock's hands were frozen at midnight, and the tick-tock sound had a warped, almost echoing quality to it. I continued, uneasy but determined to understand what this place was. The rooms were bizarrely interconnected, each holding remnants from different times and places. One looked like a Victorian parlor with long torn curtains and chandeliers full of melted candles. Another felt like an abandoned classroom. Chalk-dusted blackboards covered one wall, though the writing on them seemed faded, written in a language I couldn't identify. Dust and disarray filled every inch. In one particularly dark room, I stumbled upon what appeared to be an old laboratory. The tables were cluttered with broken glass vials, twisted metal instruments, and stacks of moldy papers scrawled with notes that made my head ache just to look at. A harsh chemical smell, sharp like ammonia, stung my nose, making my eyes water. I had the feeling that whoever had been here, they had left in a hurry, abandoning whatever strange work they'd been doing. I kept moving, though each step grew more hesitant, like I was being watched. Shadows seemed to shift along the walls, fleetingly present just at the corner of my vision. I shook it off, blaming my nerves until I heard a faint whisper. It was unintelligible but haunting, like it was calling my name. My flashlight dimmed, but even in its weakening beam, I could see the words on the walls scratched into the plaster. Most were faded, but I made out something chilling. They are waiting. Then a hallway opened into an eerily familiar neighborhood scene. Rows of little houses lined up on each side, but each house had something wrong. One was missing windows. Another had its door replaced by what looked like a single dark mirror that swallowed my reflection. Toy cars sat scattered across driveways as though frozen mid-play, and every yard was overgrown, weeds consuming any trace of life. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as I walked past each house, resisting the urge to knock or peer into their darkened windows. I attempted to enter one of the houses, thinking maybe it would lead me back. I managed to pry open a back window and crawled in, but as soon as I got inside, I realized I was in yet another replica of my own basement. This one, though, had crumbling brick walls, and the ceiling dripped a dark, sticky substance that stained the floors. My heart pounded as I moved through it, hoping that it would lead me back to where I started. My phone's battery inexplicably stayed at the last bar for what felt like hours. The air grew thick with a metallic smell, like rust and damp soil. Just as I was about to lose hope, a faint voice murmured something that sounded almost like my name. Isaac, it breathed. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hall, cloaked in shadows. I froze, but in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone, leaving only the echo of footsteps that seemed to grow fainter and fainter. As I ventured deeper into this twisted labyrinth, I came across a dimly lit library. Books lined the shelves, their spines worn and titles erased by time. One book lay open on a desk, its pages filled with illegible symbols. In the margins, someone had scrawled, "Do not disturb the silence, it watches." A cold chill ran down my spine as I closed the book and glanced around, feeling as though 100 unseen eyes were upon me. More time passed, or so I thought, but I felt no hunger, no thirst. I wasn't even tired. Something was sustaining me in this nightmare, something beyond my understanding. Occasionally, I'd hear faint laughter or crying, but when I tried to follow the sounds, they only led me back to the beginning. I'm not sure how long I've been here now. Days. Weeks. Time seems to fold in on itself. My phone shows the same time over and over. The last line of the wall script is etched into my mind. No one leaves who enters. If you're reading this, please listen. I don't know if I'll ever escape this place, but if you ever see an old door appear in your house, or if you hear whispers in the stillness, don't go looking. I lingered in that decaying library, clutching the strange, heavy book with the words, "Do not disturb the silence." It watches repeating in my mind. As I glanced around, the shadows seemed to pool in the corners, swirling and shifting as if they had been waiting for me to finally notice them. There was no sound. The silence pressed down like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It felt like every movement I made, every single breath, was being listened to, measured. I put the book down slowly, its weight feeling somehow colder than before, and turned to leave. As I did, I heard something faint, a soft, rhythmic scratching coming from somewhere behind one of the shelves. I couldn't help myself. I moved closer hesitantly. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as though something on the other side of the wall was trying to claw its way out. My mind raced. Maybe there was someone else trapped in here, someone who knew how to escape. I put my hand against the wall, pressing my ear to the cold, rough wood, trying to listen for any sign of life. Then, as suddenly as it started, the scratching stopped, and in its place I heard a faint, labored whisper. "You should not have come here." My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I stumbled back, but as I turned, the room seemed to warp, the walls stretching further and further away, making the room feel impossibly vast. The bookshelves towered above me, twisting like branches in a storm, and the floor beneath me creaked as though it might give way at any moment. With no other choice, I began to run, stumbling past rows of warped bookshelves and cabinets that seemed to go on forever. My footsteps echoed endlessly in that horrible silence, each step feeling heavier, each breath harder to draw. The shadows along the walls seemed to ripple and twist in my peripheral vision, almost like they were reaching out, waiting for me to stop. Then I found myself back in the hallway, but something was wrong, more wrong than before. The walls were covered in marks, deep scratches that ran in jagged, crisscrossing lines all the way to the ceiling. I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach as I recognized some of the markings. They were handprints, smeared and clawing at the walls, as if countless others had tried to escape this place before me. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, cloaked in darkness. It was tall, hunched, with limbs that seemed far too long, almost skeletal. I couldn't see its face, but it seemed to be watching me, its head cocked slightly as though studying my every move. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away, my body locked in place as fear wrapped around me like chains. Slowly, the figure raised one bony finger and pointed it directly at me. A cold whisper filled the air, and though I couldn't make out the words, the meaning was unmistakable. Leave, if you can. The walls around me began to close in, as though the house itself was alive, shifting, squeezing me into a tighter and tighter space. The air grew thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. I turned, stumbling forward, trying to find any way out. Doors opened and closed, rooms distorted and elongated as if taunting me, leading me in circles. And then I was back in the room with the table, where the hands of the old clock were frozen at midnight. Only now, the clock's hands were moving, ticking forward with an eerie slowness that sent chills down my spine. With each tick, I felt something pull at me, drawing me closer to the clock. In the reflection of the clock's glass face, I caught a glimpse of something behind me. The shadows shifted, coming together to form a shape, a figure that looked just like me. Only this version of myself had hollow eyes and a twisted smile, its mouth open in a silent scream. I staggered back, gasping, and the reflection disappeared. But in that moment, I realized something horrifying. This place wasn't just an endless maze. It was a trap, a prison where every wrong turn brought me deeper, pulled me further in until there was no way back. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching, heavy, slow, echoing with each deliberate step. And as the shadowed figure emerged from around the corner, its face hidden, I felt the walls closing in once again. The footsteps drew closer, heavy and relentless, echoing through the twisted corridors. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, yet I couldn't move, rooted in place by some terrible, unseen force. As the figure loomed into view, I caught glimpses of details that filled me with dread. Long, skeletal fingers, empty eye sockets that seemed to draw in the darkness around them, and a mouth stretched wide in a fixed, unnatural grin. The figure's head tilted, and a faint, raspy whisper filled the air, not so much a sound as a feeling pressing against my mind. "You are in our home now." In a burst of panic, I turned and bolted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in sickening rhythm with the relentless steps following close behind. Rooms flickered past in a chaotic blur, familiar spaces from my childhood, twisted and decayed, hallways that bent at impossible angles, shadows stretching along the walls like watching eyes. I rounded a corner, gasping for air, and came upon a door. This one looked different, newer, sturdy, its handle gleaming in the dim light. Without thinking, I threw myself at it, grasping the handle and shoving it open. Inside, the room was cold, almost painfully so. It was nearly empty, save for an old, dusty mirror hanging on the far wall, and in it, my reflection stared back at me. But something was wrong. The eyes looking back weren't mine. They were cold, void of life, watching me with a strange intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, the reflection moved of its own accord, lifting a hand to wave slowly, mockingly. I stumbled back, my hands reaching for the door, but it slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. I was trapped, my own reflection grinning back at me as though it had won some twisted game. The walls around me began to shake, the air thickening with a low rumbling sound that felt almost like laughter. And then the mirror's surface began to distort, rippling like water. I watched in horror as my reflection reached a hand through the glass, its fingers stretching toward me. The closer it came, the colder the room grew, until my breath fogged the air in short, panicked bursts. Finally, I felt those icy fingers graze my skin. A numbness spread through my body, locking my limbs in place. My reflection's empty eyes were inches from mine, its breath chilling my face. In a hollow, mocking voice, it whispered, "You should have stayed out of the basement." With one final surge of terror, I tried to pull away, my vision blurring as the reflection's hand tightened around my wrist, pulling me closer and closer to the mirror. Shadows danced around the room, whispering, laughing, taunting. Then everything went dark. When I came to, I was back in the basement, but something was wrong. The walls felt different, heavier, like they were closing in. The air was thick with silence, an almost physical presence pressing down on me, and as I looked around, dread settled deep in my bones. I could see myself, or some version of me, standing in the corner of the room, still as a statue. It watched me with the same hollow eyes, the twisted grin still etched onto its face. I was no longer in my world, I was in its. Now I wander these twisted halls, trying to find a way back, but every door leads deeper into the maze, each room more nightmarish than the last. I feel the presence of others, souls trapped here long before me, their whispers filling the endless silence. They say there is no escape, that this place has been here for centuries, claiming those who wander too far. So if you're reading this, take heed of my warning. Stay out of the basement. Ignore the whispers, the strange calls, the things you might see out of the corner of your eye. Because once you cross into their world, they won't let you go.